Good evening, good evening, good evening. I just have a couple of announcements for you. Some may know or have read the obituary, but we do want to express the sympathy of the congregation to Larry Billington and family on the death of his brother, Thomas Billington. And the arrangements are as follows. Visitation will be from 12 until 2 this coming Sunday at the J.H. Churchill Funeral Home, and graveside service will be at 2:30 at the Scottsgrove Baptist Church Cemetery for Mr. Thomas Billington. Also, a reminder that if we're not able to participate in the contribution, the special contribution last Sunday on behalf of the storm victims, we will be, again this Sunday. The elders will be in the back following the invitation song or the closing song, and we'll be able to participate if you need that opportunity this coming Sunday, the 20th. Ask Tim Stark, if he would, to lead our minds in our closing prayers. We're dismissed from this assembly to our classes. Derek?
How will you explain? How will you describe a love that goes from east to west and runs as deep as it is wide? You know all our hopes, Lord, you know all our fears, and words cannot express the love we feel, but we long for you to hear. So listen to our hearts, hear our spirit sing, a song of praise and Lord, from those you have redeemed. We will use the words we know to tell you what an awesome God you are, but words are not enough to tell you about love, so listen to our hearts. Words that fall like rain, rough these lips of mine. And if I had 1,000 years, Lord, I would still run out of time. If you listen to my heart, every beat will say, thank you for the light, thank you for the truth, thank you for the way. So listen to our hearts, hear our spirit sing, a song of praise and hope from those you have redeemed. We will use the words we know to tell you what an awesome God you are. But words are not enough to tell you about love, so listen to our hearts. Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy riven side and shore be us in the double cure. Cleanse me from its guilt and power. Not the lady
So I recently heard a story I want to tell you, and then I'll tell you while I'm telling you the story. There was a couple, Mark and Susan, they met in college, and after graduating, they married, and Mark joined the Army, and they traveled around the world, and Susan was always able to find work wherever they went. And so they've been married for about 8 years, and Susan was having eyesight issues. So they go to the eye doctor to see what's going on, and they do tests and so forth, and they determined that she's losing her sight and that it was irreversible. So they're coming to grips with this news, and Mark is trying to comfort her, saying, we're going to work through this. And when you've lost your sight, I'll be here with you, and you'll learn how to function without your sight. So the day comes, she finally does lose her sight, and so he's with her every step of the way. He'll take her to work every morning. He'll walk her to the door, walk her up to her desk, and get her settled. And then he goes on into work. So he does this for a few weeks, and then he tells her, he says, now, I got to get to work earlier, so I'm not going to be able to take you. And so she panics. He says, don't worry, we're going to ride the bus together, walk up to your office together, we'll count the steps and the directions until you've got it. So he does this for a couple weeks, and he says, all right, now this coming week, you're going to do it by yourself. And so she's worried about, she's like, I got to remember how to walk to the bus stop, which wasn't far from home. And then I got to remember the turns and when to get off. And so what made it easier, the bus driver said, I'll let you know when we get to your stop. Okay. So she goes Monday, it goes well. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it goes well. She goes to get on the bus Friday morning, and the bus driver says, you sure are a lucky woman. And she said, don't say that to me. I'm blind. He said, no, that's not what I mean. Every time I drop you off at your stop, there's this man in full military uniform watching for you to get off. And he follows behind you, watching you like a hawk until you get to the door of your business. And when you open it and go in, he'll stand at attention, salute, and then he'll walk off. She said, do you know who? He said, do you know who that might be? And she put it together. She said, it's my husband. She thought, all this week, I thought I've been alone, but he's been right there watching me. I'm not alone. I am being watched. Now, you can parallel that to how God, even though we can't see him, is present. So here's what happened. So I went and made a visit today, and a shut-in who hopefully will not be a permanent shut-in was telling me about Sunday morning how they were watching church and just having a bad morning, thinking about a lot of different things. And then they told me, they said, you got to one point and then you mentioned this one verse. And she explained how that verse was meaningful to her and her family and why it was special. We all have verses that are, really special to us. And I kind of was paused, and she said, it was a God thing. And I thought, yeah, it was. She was in a place of despair, and I didn't know this. I had prepared a sermon, and I'm just sitting here praying, going, Lord, I hope this does some good, and I hope I don't mess it up. And then later to have someone say, when you mention this verse and when you emphasize this verse, here's why that's special to us, da-da-da-da-da-da. She said it was a God thing. And I think everybody can probably say, yeah, we've had some of those moments in our life where, whatever is happening, but then something happens and you go, that's exactly what I needed. So I'm not going to presume to speak for the Almighty as to how he providentially works in the world, only to say that there's an awful lot of times that people say stuff like that to me. And so whenever you think you're alone or whenever you're in a bad spot, just remember God is always present. We can't see him, we can't touch him, but keep listening. And maybe in a similar way, you'll go, okay, now I know. Let's stand and sing.
Be thou my wisdom, be thou my true word.
Father in heaven, we're thankful for today and all the many blessings that you continue to pour over us. Father, we're thankful for this time of worship tonight, that we can gather together and sing and rejoice with you and rejoice with each other. And Father, for the message tonight, may we ever feel your comforting hand around us to guide us and to protect us. Father, thank you for the class time that we're about to go to. Help our teachers to present a lesson tonight that we can take out and live each and every day. Thank you most of all for Christ and for his sacrifice for us. And it's through his name that I pray. Amen.
Okay. Probably nobody can do it better than you. Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you tonight. If you don't have one of the Peak of the Week sheets, my good friend Alan McKeel has a handful. Just raise your hand and he will bring one to you. Basically, what I've got on the back side is an outline of where we're going to be going for the next several weeks. We're studying the life and times of Joseph. I love the narratives in the Bible, those in the Old Testament and those in the New Testament as well. There are a lot more in the Old Testament and hardly know where to begin because I love to do a study of David. I mean, you can't get any better than that. I love to do Abraham, and Job is a really good one. Jonah's a good one, but we're going to be doing Joseph for a while. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I told John Dale a while ago that he could probably introduce me as well as anyone, maybe better than I could introduce myself. Back in the year 1977, we had just had a baby boy in Memphis where I was in Harding grad school, and I had taken a position on the staff here. Back then it was 7th and Poplar, and we moved here directly from Memphis. I still remember the 3 men from up here that came down and helped us move, and we started with our ministry here. I can tell you this, we were young and we were still in our 20s, and I'm 6 years younger than John, so if you know how to do the math, then you know how old I am. And John has meant so much to me and my wife in so many ways. When I got here, I decided I would hang around John, which was a good decision. Because back then, and I'm sure probably during his entire ministry, John would go to the hospital to visit every day. And we were within walking distance from the church building at 7th and Poplar to Murray Callaway County Hospital. And so we would walk down there, and John would speak to every person he passed in the hallway, whether he knew them or not. He would greet them. And I learned a lot of pointers from John about how to, I would say as a preacher, how to have a good bedside manner. If you know what I mean? There are doctors that are good at medicine, but not very good with their bedside manner. There are preachers who are good in the pulpit, but aren't very good with their bedside manner. John is both, and so I learned a lot from him about how to meet and get to know people, and still to this day, it's in my blood. I'll go into Walmart or Kroger, and I'll go up to checkout, and invariably, I'll start a conversation with the checker and find out a little bit about how their day is going and chat with them. And I was telling my oldest son, who's a good kid, that I really enjoyed doing that. And he said, "Dad, why would you ever speak to a checker in the grocery store?" He just didn't get it, that whether or not it ever makes a difference, it will make a difference then and there. And I bet you many a person has gone home after a John Dale greeting to tell their husband or wife, "You know what happened today? This guy didn't even know who he was. He was walking past me in the aisle and he spoke to me, and he did it in a really friendly way. And it just kind of made my day. I was feeling down, and it just made me feel better. And so I learned a lot about how to be a a good minister from John. And we spent a couple of years here in Murray. And at the ripe old age of 27, I decided I was ripe and ready to get in the pulpit full time. I'd had some experience when John wasn't in the pulpit preaching at 7th and Poplar, and Jerry Bowles was our song leader back then, great guy and a great friend. And once in a while, Jerry couldn't lead, and he would have me lead singing. I had done a little bit of that already. So I was bursting at the seams and ready to go and save the world. And so I started my first ministry in the pulpit. Here, they used to call me the associate minister, and they would call John the prime minister. I remember that. And so I began, and from that point on, until I finished my ministry and stepped down, about 10 years ago, I spent 40 years in the pulpit, and I loved it, and I might have still been doing it. I still do the occasional wedding or funeral, and the occasional class, and even the occasional sermon. But I got hurt really badly. It was a bicycle accident when I was preaching in Corpus Christi, Texas, and well, long story short, because it is a long story, spent a month in the hospital, had 3 major surgeries. Don't remember the first 7 days of my time in the hospital. My neurosurgeon did not think I would ever walk again. And he told me when he released me from care a year and a half later, he said, "Mark, it's a miracle." And my view of miracles is somewhere between the belief of our folks who say that there are only natural events today. No such thing as a miracle in our day and time. And then the people, on the other hand, who believe that everything is a miracle. And I'm somewhere between those two, and I'll just leave it at that. But I was pleased. I had to learn to walk again, spent a lot of time in rehab, and eventually was able to learn to walk again, and eventually got back in the pulpit. I had to preach using a stool, and that worked well. Probably some of the best preaching of my entire preaching of 40 years was done in that last 2 years. But I found out that having a very serious spinal cord injury does more than just threaten your ability to walk. Extreme neuropathy, but the thing that really hit me hardest was it reduces your energy level down to about 25% of what you used to have. And I would be in my office and busy doing things, preparing classes and sermons, and I would just get worn out. The daily grind was a little too much, and sometimes I would be at my desk like this. And my secretary would quietly come and close the office door. She was very polite and caring in that way. But eventually, visiting with the elders, decided it would be best for me to go ahead and do kind of an early retirement. And I'm very thankful that God had taken care of us, and I hate to say this because the church had not. Churches in our fellowship, as a rule, do nothing for preachers in their retirement, and some of my best friends are elders, so I'm not ripping on elders, but I've had some good friends who in their 70s, when they kind of reached the end of the line in ministry, said, "Mark, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I've always lived in the church-owned house, and I know of one good friend of mine, when he got into his 70s and had to step down from full-time ministry, had to move to Iowa and live in his daughter's basement." I'll just stop there because you don't need to hear any more of that. But God took care of us in that my wife and I had made some real good investments when we were living in Searcy, Arkansas, and I was preaching there for the Downtown Church of Christ. And we had a big congregation. We had 10 people on our staff, and it was a joy to get in the pulpit there twice on Sunday morning, teach a class in between, and preach again on Sunday night. But we were kind of doing that back in the Seventh and Poplar days, weren't we, John? And I don't know how we did it. Today, I know I could not hold up with that kind of regimen. And I was able to preach until I was in my early 60s. And with the investments we had, we were able to step down. And we moved to be near our grandkids, which happens to be in New Jersey. We just spent a week up there. And everybody said, why would you retire and go to New Jersey? Our friends in Texas were saying that. And you know what? When we moved to New Jersey, our new friends up there were saying that. And they were saying, listen, when we retire, we're not staying here. Well, where are you going to go? The main answer was somewhere warmer. And so here we are. And we moved back here to be nearer to family. Linda was born here, Murray Callaway County Hospital. And I'm a Texan. We got married 51 years ago and still going strong. We had spent 12 years in Texas where I preached there. We spent 9 years in New Jersey with our grandkids. And she said, I'd like to go live in Murray, Kentucky. I said, well, there are some other good options, you know. And I thought Searcy, Arkansas would be a great option because we still have a lot of good friends there. And when I go back and walk in the door at the Downtown Church of Christ, we just get swarmed. And it's a really wonderful feeling. And I'm sure, John, you have that happen too, when you've been away and you come back home. And so we are here. We moved in January. We live in a log cabin out by Ken Lake State Park. In fact, if you walk on the backside of our lot where our property ends, you'll see a sign on a tree that says Ken Lake State Park limits. And so that's where we live. We've got a good hike going home and coming back, but that's okay. We're enjoying living in the country. We've met some really good friends living in the country, and we still get to come to Murray, do our shopping, worship here, and see friends from bygone days. And I have to say they are bygone days because our running buddies back then, I'll just tell you, there are several that are still around here. It's 45 years ago, and things have changed in those days. We were in our 20s. Now we're in our late 60s and early 70s. So we don't like to think we're old, but when we look in the mirror, we know it's true. Tonight I want to introduce you to our study. And I'm kind of hard-pressed tonight to really know where to go with this because I've got the outline of where we're going in coming weeks, and it's going to go a lot smoother in the coming weeks. But I've got to tell you that tonight I'm trying to not do that. John said it works better if I put it in my pocket. All right, starting over again. I'm trying to compress about 6 or 7 chapters into 30 minutes, whereas in the latter part, when we really get into the life of Joseph, we're going to be looking at 12 to 15 verses at a time at some of the really significant events in the life of Joseph. Lessons that I think are so applicable still to our lives today. And he's got a rich heritage, and I wanted to start out tonight by talking a little bit about his heritage. You know that his great-grandfather was Abraham. And then Abraham's son Isaac was his grandfather. And then Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, was his father. And so much of what's going on right now in the Middle East is better understood when you understand the Old Testament and the things that were happening then. And in these chapters we're going to be studying, we're going to see that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are mentioned over and over and over again, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Jesus refers to them. Peter refers to them. Stephen refers to them in Acts 7. I hope we'll get to that passage in just a moment. And the 12 sons of Jacob, one of which was Joseph, are so significant. Two of Leah's kids played an important role that are still very important to those who call themselves Jews today. And I just say that casually because I've got a lot of good friends who are Jewish. I have to say, my best friend in New Jersey is Jewish. We still talk on the phone once a week, mostly about football. We don't talk about our children and our husbands and our emotions. And men, we talk about the surface stuff. We don't get very deep. We talk about football and the weather and hunting and fishing, but we talk once a week. And so I've got a lot of really close friends that are Jewish. Now, when you understand the background here, you understand Judaism a little better. One of the sons of Jacob and Leah, the wife that was not loved as much as Rachel. In fact, the Bible even says she was hated. I don't think Jacob ever hated her. We're not told that he said that, but God said that because he loved her less. But one of the sons was Levi. And where do we go with Levi? Who were the priests? What do we call them? The Levites, right? The Levites. That's Levi, one of the sons of Jacob and Leah. And another one of their sons was called Judah. And do you know where Judaism gets its root name? From this son of Jacob and Leah named Judah. And so when you understand the Old Testament better, you understand Judaism better, and you understand a little better what's happening today in the Middle East between Israel and those who live there and those who regard it as their ancestral homeland. And even though the Palestinians don't like it that they're there, and the Iranians don't like it that they're there, and a lot of others, they ain't leaving. I mean, they're going to cling to that land till the last man because that's their ancestral homeland. And Joseph was an important part of that. Now, there are so many stories that I wanted to get to tonight, and I know we're not going to have near enough time. One of the great ones, if we start in Genesis 29, and if you want to open your Bibles there, I've got my Bible here on my phone. In the last years of my ministry, I thought, all of these young kids, they bring their iPads and their phones, and they have their Bible on their phone. And I thought, if I'm going to relate to them, maybe I need to try doing that. It was hard at first. I mean, looking down at this, but after a while you get used to it, and in fact, you get to where you don't depend on it so much. You study your lesson so hard that it's in your head and in your heart, and you don't really have to spend a lot of time looking down. And I think that's probably the best way to preach. But anyway, when you go from Genesis 29, where we're introduced there to Laban, who was the uncle of Jacob, and that whole story about how the sheep and the goats, God blessed Jacob as the caretaker, so he built up his flocks, and before long, he was as wealthier than Laban, and Laban was jealous, and he was deceitful, and he really mistreated Jacob. And Jacob decided after a while that he was going to take his wives, Leah and Rachel, and he was going to skedaddle and go back home, which we call today the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. That's where he wanted to go back, where his family was, and he ultimately would. And Joseph was born to Rachel after a long period of time where she wanted a child, but God had not opened her womb. It seems in the Old Testament there were so many women who were, at least early on, unable to bear children. And Rachel was one of those, and it just broke her heart that Leah was having all of these babies, and her handmaids were having all of these babies, and she wasn't in on the action. And finally, God opened her womb, and she had her first son, and that was Joseph. And the really sad ending later on, when she gets pregnant the second time, she gives birth to the last of her babies, and the last of the babies of Jacob, Benjamin, and she dies in childbirth. Now these days, women, at least in America, don't die that often in childbirth. But I'm here to tell you that 125 years ago, it was a lot different. Two, not one, but two of my great-grandmothers died in childbirth. And I can only imagine how heartbreaking it was in those families to lose the matriarch. And so that happened. Jacob would eventually lose his beloved Rachel. But Joseph kind of picks up then, and that's where we really get into his life and studying about how God worked and how God blessed him. Because Joseph, I got to believe that he was a humble person, that he loved God because God blessed him more than any of his brothers. But at times it seems like he wanted to kind of show off to his siblings. And remember, there are 11 boys and one girl, Dinah. Could you imagine being the father in that situation, and you have boy, 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 girl, boy, boy. And so I'm sure he was rejoicing to have even one daughter. And then his brothers. He had to look in on his brothers. When you go to chapter 37, I believe that's the passage, it's where Joseph is 17 years old. We go from his birth and we fast forward all the way to when he's 17 years old. And it reminds me a little bit of Jesus in that he was born and then, boom, he's 12 years old. And we really don't know much of anything, unless you believe the Maccabees, much of anything that happened in his early life. And the same is true with Joseph. By the age of 17, his father is concerned about the brothers because they're out taking care of the flocks and they're doing the family business. And Joseph at this point is still the baby, even though Benjamin is going to be the baby. And his father sends him to go check on his brothers. I want to backtrack for just a second. One of the dangers of trying to speak extemporaneously, that is without notes, is that you miss a point that you think is really significant. And how do you back up? In a sermon, that's really hard to do. It's embarrassing to do, but in a class, maybe not quite as embarrassing. So I want to back up for just a second, and that is, I want to back up to where Jacob, and this is between where Joseph comes on the scene, but Jacob and Esau, they were twin brothers, and they were on outs with each other. The last time they saw each other, Esau wanted to kill Jacob because Jacob had stolen his birthright. And so Jacob, with the help of his mother, loaded up and he left town. And Esau wanted to just kill him. And years went by. And one good thing about the passage of time is that it has a way of dulling our sharp edges. And it had done that with Esau. Jacob didn't know this. Now, this is in the text somewhere. Jacob did not know, and so he prepared to go and meet Esau as he was leaving Laban, and he lined up his flocks and his children and his wives, put them in different groups. He got together a big number of the flocks that he was going to give to his brother Esau as a peace offering. He just wanted to see if Esau would not kill him. And so, as they moved closer and closer to each other, Jacob is leading the way with these flocks and his men, and Esau appears in the distance, and they start coming closer and closer together, and Jacob gets down and kneels before his brother. He wanted to let his brother know that he was going to be subservient. And in fact, there are several times in this episode where Jacob uses the word Lord, L-O-R-D, lowercase, to refer to Esau. Kind of like the Hebrew letter says that Sarah did with Abraham, called him Lord, lowercase l. One time I suggested to my dear sweet wife that she might try that. Not a good idea. That did not go over very well. So I didn't try that again. But that's what Jacob was doing. He was trying to show Esau how much he was sorry for what he had done many years ago. And you know what? Esau came up to him. Not with a sword, not with a club, but he came up to him with open arms. And they embraced each other, and they wept on each other's necks, and they kissed each other's necks. And one of the most moving passages, I think, in the Old Testament is where Jacob says to his brother that he thought still wanted to kill him, but now hugs his neck. And he said, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God." Now, if you've ever loved somebody so much that you could say that, that's the ultimate compliment in my book. I apologize. I'm a little bit on edge emotionally tonight. I don't want to go into it very much, but tomorrow is October 17th. And that's the day that our son Eric, born at Murray Callaway County Hospital, little 2-year-old precious boy, we were in the car, we were kids in our 20s, had an accident, and everybody was fine, but our son Eric was killed. And we had been here, well, at 7th and Poplar, and John preached Eric's funeral, and Jerry Bowles led the singing, and there was a massive crowd that day that came. And I just don't remember everybody because there was so much going on, but I'm here to tell you one person that I remember more than anybody else. We were in the funeral home, and people were coming by, and they were giving us hugs, and they were saying things that they thought they knew about and didn't. And there was one guy that came up to me, big, muscular guy, and with tears in his eyes, he gave me a big bear hug. And he said 3 words. And it's the best 3 words that I've ever heard or that anybody has ever heard. He said, "I love you." And then he left. Wouldn't it be great when our life is over and we stand before God, if He reached out with His arms, put them around us and said those 3 words? Oh, that's all I would need. And here's kind of the follow-up to that story. When we got back here, this go-around, we got to know Derek Jones, and tremendous worship leader. You guys are blessed. You've had some of the best worship leaders here that I've ever known anywhere. And Linda now is teaching at the school where Stacy Jones teaches, and they see each other pretty much every day. And Derek and Stacy lost their son, Levi, in a car accident. A lot of similarities, but here's the coup de grace. Both of our boys are buried in the same little cemetery over here on the edge of Murray. And when we go now, we can visit Eric's grave, and we can also visit Levi's grave. And we put the words of 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 23 on the back of Eric's tombstone because we know he's not there. We know that he is with God. In fact, I can't tell you how many times I've looked up toward heaven and spoken to God in a way that I should not, saying, "God, why did you take Eric instead of me?" And on the back of his tombstone, we have the words of David after he lost his son, when everybody was saying, "We don't know what to do because we're afraid he's going to harm himself now that he knows his son, born to himself in Bathsheba, was dead." David arose, washed, shaved, ate a meal, and everybody was puzzled as to why it was happening that way. And David said, "I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. And those are the words we have on the back of Eric's tombstone. And that's the main reason that we go out there. Not because we believe that Eric's there. We know that he's with God, but we trust as believers that our son is with God and that one day we may have the opportunity to be with him again. And I'm here to tell you, though, that the folks who are already there need to be careful. Because my wife has said, on that day when she enters the pearly gates, she is likely to run over people trying to get to our son. I understand that emotion as the father, and I love my wife dearly. We process grief differently. She has responded to this in ways different from me, but that's okay because I'm sure it'd be true in your family and already is true for a lot of you. In the remaining 8 or so minutes that we have left, I want to go to Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 7, we have kind of the synopsis of the life of Joseph. It's where Stephen is standing before the Sanhedrin. He's on trial. And they want to know why he's preaching what he is. And so he begins with a dissertation about the history of Israel as a nation, and the history of Joseph is in here too. And like I say, it's kind of a synopsis of his life. Verse 1. Then the high priest asked Stephen, "Are these charges true, that he was preaching about Jesus the Messiah?" And Stephen replies, "Brothers and fathers, listen to me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia." That's modern-day Iraq, by the way. Before he lived in Haran, he was told by God, "Leave your country and your people. Go to a land I will show you." So he left the land of the Chaldeans and he settled in Haran. After the death of his father, that's Terah, God sent him to this land where you are now living, the land of Israel, the Canaan promised land. He gave him no inheritance here, not even enough ground to set his foot on. But God promised him that he and his descendants after him would possess the land, even though at that time, all right, this is where it gets problematic. I'm blocked from seeing the bottom part of that verse. I'll just go right next to verse 6. God spoke to him in this way: "For 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves," God said, "and afterward they will come out of that country and worship me in this place." And then he gave Abraham the covenant of circumcision. Now, Abraham, when he left his ancestral homeland, going to this new land that he knew nothing about, the promised land, the land of Canaan, the land that was flowing with milk and honey, but he had no promise of what life was going to be like there. Life for him was already nomadic, and he trusted God and he went. And that amazes me. I mean, it really does, until I stop to think about our forebears from 200-300 years ago who left Europe And the Pews left the country of Wales. They went to Ireland. They stayed there until it was a good time to set sail, and then they would head to the New World. And you know how much they had with them? As a rule, they had one trunk. Now, if you were to go home tonight and put in a trunk what you were going to live on for the next months, maybe even years of your life, what would you put in the trunk? I mean, even the trunk of the car's not going to begin to hold what we think we need. And they set out to sail across 3,000 miles of ocean in a ship. And I've seen some replica ships that I don't think I would even want to get on in the harbor, much less set sail and go across the Atlantic. And they did that with faith that God was going to lead them to a new life in the new world where they were not persecuted. And my Quaker ancestors landed in Pennsylvania, and they filtered down to Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama's kind of our homeland now. But those folks, they were braver than I have ever been or ever will be to do what they did. And so, it's not 7:30, is it? That clock's not right. Sorry. Alan's nodding his head affirmatively. Well, if you read the rest of Acts chapter 7, Stephen gives this synopsis of the life of Joseph, and he takes about 10 verses to describe Joseph, which means to me that in the history that he's giving here in Acts chapter 7, Joseph is very important because he plays a role as larger than anybody else that Stephen's going to refer to here. And next week, I am going to be a little better organized, and we're going to start in on Joseph's dreams. In Genesis 37, verses 1 through 11. And I will look forward to that because the dream sequence occurs not just once, but several times in the life of Joseph. And it is really intriguing. Let's close with a moment of prayer. Father, we thank you for a beautiful day, for your amazing love, for the time that we have to take out of our busy lives, to gather together with fellow believers, to be encouraged and uplifted, and to know that we've been fed and nourished, and that God willing, Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, we'll be here, and we'll get some more of that love and nourishment that you intend for us to have, because the church is a family. It's a spiritual family, and we are privileged to be in this family. Guide us safely to our homes. In Jesus' name, amen.